So, the movie we thought we'd never get to see has finally been released. After a lukewarm reception at last year's Toronto Film Festival, Ron Howard's latest struggled to find a distributor. The true story-inspired tale featuring an all-star cast that's equal parts Lord of the Flies, The Beach, and a high-end cologne commercial that somehow spirals into colonialist meltdown sure had a lot of promise. But does the end result live up to the hype? Well, that's what we're gonna find out today. I'm Peter from Vinyl and Celluloid, and this is my review of Eden. Ron Howard's movies are a funny thing. They are the cinematic equivalent of comfort food. Safe, warm, and occasionally a bit too soggy. The man has directed a couple of very good movies that really stand out, a bunch of good ones that have won our hearts, but the majority of his filmography is filled with trite titles that are watched by many and forgotten by even more. Yes, that includes everyone's favorite movie for about 2 months, released in the early 2000s. To see the man who was responsible for bringing Richie Cunningham to life, trading in his slice of life saccharine angles for sunburn, slow-motion suffering, brought hope that this would be his big serious movie moment. A modest budget, a stacked cast, though we know that these days that doesn't immediately translate into box office gold, and a compelling narrative that's anchored on a survival thriller / philosophical allegory that takes place in a deserted island should be enough to ensure the movie's success. Alas, that isn't the case. That's not to say that the movie is completely bad and unwatchable, just that this dark version of Howard doesn't work as well as it should. That said, Eden isn't exactly good, but it's not exactly bad either. It's divisive, sweaty, gorgeously sharp nonsense. But before I get to the highs and lows of this movie, let me recap the story. Set in 1929, Eden follows Dr. Friedrich Ritter, played by Jude Law, and his partner Dora Strauch, played by Vanessa Kirby, as they abandon a troubled Europe for the remote Floreana Island in the Galapagos, seeking to live by their own ideals and escape the constraints of civilization. Friedrich, driven by philosophical ambitions, hopes to write a manifesto that will redefine humanity, whilst Dora looks for peace and healing in isolation. Their solitude is soon disrupted by the arrival of the Wittmer family, Heinz, played by Daniel Brühl, and Margaret, played by Sydney Sweeney, and their young son, who are inspired by the doctor's visions but bring their own hopes and personal tensions. The fragile harmony is further tested when the flamboyant Baroness Eloise de Wagner, played by Ana de Armas, arrives with her entourage, determined to build a luxury hotel and assert her dominance over the island. The struggle for survival exposes the limits of their ideals and the reality of human nature. As resources dwindle and ambitions clash, the settlers' relationships unravel, revealing underlying resentments, rivalries, and the darker sides of their personalities. Now here's where things get murky. Eden wants to be about a lot: survival, ego, the collapse of utopian ideals, the fragility of civilization, but Ron Howard, bless him, might have bitten off more than he could chew. The tone is unexpectedly bleak. It's not the triumphant castaway-style survival story some viewers may expect. It's a grim descent into paranoia, philosophical despair, and heart-stroke-fueled madness. Some things in this movie work, others don't, and the title ends up feeling like a cinematic mirage. You keep thinking it's about to turn into something meaningful. It doesn't. And to support this opinion, here are the usual 4 key aspects that shaped my take on this movie. Starting with the acting. The all-star cast, Ana de Armas, Vanessa Kirby, Sydney Sweeney, Jude Law, and Daniel Brühl, should, at least on paper, be enough to sell this take on the real-life Galapagos affair. But much like everything else in this movie, it's hit and miss. Jude Law is fantastic as Dr. Ritter, channeling the same unsettling charisma as Benjamin Linus from Lost. He becomes the philosophical and political center of the narrative, a man disillusioned with the modern world and furious at what mankind has let happen, events such as World War I and the Great Depression. Like so many hacks before him, he sets out to build a new world rooted in creative destruction. Vanessa Kirby is equally strong as Dora Strauch, Ritter's wife and ideological ally. Now, I haven't seen the 2013 documentary where the character inspired by the real counterpart is voiced by Kate Blanchett, but it's hard to imagine anyone else bringing such cold, calculated self-interest to the role quite like Kirby does. The Vitmas, Margaret and Heinz, played by Sydney Sweeney and Daniel Brühl, are solid, though they inevitably pale next to Law and Kirby. Still, their characters, filled with hope, naivete, and a yearning to follow someone, anyone really, are compelling enough, even if they don't get the screen time their dynamic deserves. Sweeney is particularly convincing with her German accent in a movie that follows the key rule of what I like to call the Ridley Scott School of Speech. Every actor is allowed to bring their very own accent to the movie. Her character has the most interesting arc, though the script isn't always sure how to handle it. Now things get trickier with Ana de Armas. Her take on the Baroness veers into full camp. We already know that accents and nuance aren't exactly the actress's strong suit, but here she plays the role as if she just wandered in from an episode of Gilligan's Island. And no, that's not a compliment. Every time the camera lands on her, it feels like we're watching a completely different movie, and not a better one. But, as we've seen time and time again, even when the acting is good, a movie can get bogged down by technical execution. This is yet another area where things do not go according to plan. You'd think that with Hans Zimmer in charge of the score and the actual Galapagos Islands doing production design for free, Eden would be at least technically bulletproof. And yet, here we are. Let's start with the script, shall we? Noah Pink's screenplay feels like it was pitched as a rejected season of The White Lotus and then rewritten in a notes app after a tense dinner party. Critics have been polite enough to call it ambitious, which is usually code for tries to do too much and succeeds at none of it. There's survivalism, utopia building, murder mystery, light satire, and yet not one theme gets to breathe before another one barges in, elbows out. The descent into chaos happens so fast you'd think someone spiked the kombucha with bath salts. I think one of the reviews I read sums this movie up perfectly. The characters go full animal with zero psychological setup. Now, Zimmer's score is doing the work. It's moody, texture, and pulses with the kind of dread that says, this island is not on TripAdvisor. It hints at doom better than the script ever does and occasionally tricks you into thinking you're watching something with actual stakes. But it's not exactly iconic Zimmer. We're in the solid atmosphere, not playlist banger tier. The editing, however, is where hope goes to die. Pacing is off, some scenes feel like they belong in a different movie entirely, possibly one where people talk like humans. The tonal shifts are jarring enough to induce whiplash, and any momentum built by the score or the actors is undercut by cuts that arrive too early, too late, or seemingly at random. You'll think, the story's getting good, and then boom, melodrama, violence, or someone screaming in the rain. Cinematography is one of the things that consistently works. Matthias Herndl shoots the Galapagos like nature's final warning. Stark grays, sharp contrasts, and a lingering sense that the land itself has given up on humanity. I would summarize his work as striking, gorgeous, and moody, which is my own way of saying this movie looks better than it deserves to. But sadly, no amount of stunning drone shots can rescue a film that structurally collapses, like a trustful exercise in week 2 of a cult retreat. Now remember what I just said about the tonal shifts and Zimmer's score? That confusion isn't just in the music. It's baked into the entire film. Eden has no idea of what kind of movie it wants to be. One minute it's a gritty survival thriller, then it tries on satire, then it's a whodunit, then it's a moral philosophy hour. Then someone hallucinates a giant bird. It plays like 5 different movies shoved into one dehydrated screenplay that never quite gets the water it needs. Characters turn from hopeful idealists to machete-swinging maniacs in the space of a scene. Dialogue bounces between we must build a new society TED Talk energy and clunky exposition dumps that sound like someone hitting the Wikipedia summary with a hammer. And the tone? Well, just imagine a DJ trying to mix Enya with 9 Inch Nails and refusing to fade out either track. And worse, the people we're stuck on this island with, they're mostly insufferable. And not in the fun Succession style watch them implode way. More like, I'd rather listen to sand than this conversation unpleasant. You don't necessarily root for anyone, you don't mourn anyone, you mostly just wait for nature to do what the screenplay refuses to do. And that's the real frustration. This is an incredible premise, a real story about utopia curdling into chaos, and somehow it ends up saying basically nothing. There are gestures towards big themes: privilege, colonialism, modern escapism, class delusion, but they're just that, gestures. No thread really gets pulled, no idea gets sharpened. It flirts with relevance and then moves on to another hallucinated bird. It could have been a cutting critique of how wealth disguises rot, or how communities collapse under pressure, or even how leadership without accountability turns paradise into hell. Instead, Eden gives us glimpses of all that, but only through fogged up goggles, leaving you to wonder, was that supposed to be the message? And then, wait, was there a message? And this brings us to what I think is the root of all the problems. Ron Howard was simply the wrong director for this story. Remember what I said about his movies being cinematic comfort food? Well, Eden needed a chef who specialized in poison, not pudding. This is a story about philosophical extremism, colonial delusion, and people slowly losing their grip on reality under the equatorial sun. It needed someone who understood madness. I'm thinking of the likes of Werner Herzog, who would have leaned into the existential absurdity and made the island itself a character. Or Darren Aronofsky, who could have found the dark comedy in privileged Europeans playing Robinson Crusoe with someone else's land. Hell, even Jordan Peele could have turned this into a slow-burn psychological horror about utopia rotting from the inside. Instead, we got Howard, who approaches every scene like he's directing a very serious episode of Happy Days. You can feel him trying to find the heartwarming moments, the redemptive beats, the clean narrative arcs that characterize his work throughout the decades. But that's the thing, the story doesn't have those. It's messy, morally ambiguous, and ultimately unsolvable. Howard keeps trying to impose structure on chaos and to find heroes in a story full of self-deluded narcissists. The result? Every potential dangerous moment gets softened, every philosophical edge gets dulled, and what should be a descent into madness becomes a lecture about the importance of community cooperation. It's like watching someone try to make a feel-good family film out of Heart of Darkness. Howard's instincts aren't wrong, they're just completely mismatched to the material. He's a craftsman who builds sturdy, reliable entertainment, but Eden needed an artist willing to let everything collapse beautifully. Instead, we got a movie that's constantly trying to clean up its own messes, rather than wallowing in it. Ultimately, Eden stands out as a missed opportunity. A film that starts with fascinating material but falters in execution. Whilst the setting and performances hint at greatness, the muddled tone and a lack of narrative focus keep it from fully realizing its potential. This story of utopian dreams unraveling into chaos may have found more clarity or genuine daring under the guidance of a different director. The blend of satire, thriller, and philosophical drama needed a surer hand to balance its many ambitions. So finally, on an island quality scale, with Jeffrey Epstein being a 0 and the first season of Lost a perfect 10, Eden lands just above average. Its efforts and aspirations, cinematography, and flashes of potential give it an edge over the sea of mediocrity, but it never quite becomes the genre standout it wants to be.